The last thing Tom Dawson expected on a quiet Monday morning was a $500 fine taped to his porch rail. The porch was still cool with the early Texas breeze when he stepped out, mug in hand. The sun filtered through the oak limbs that framed his front yard, casting mottled light over the worn bricks and faded flower pots that Ellen had arranged years ago. The note was held in place by a strip of blue painter's tape. It flapped lightly in the wind, crisp white against the weathered rail. At first, Tom thought it was from a neighbor, maybe something about the lost cat Maggie had seen over the weekend. But then he saw the HOA letterhead, and his heart sank like a stone in still water. He peeled it off, read it once, then twice. Violation, decorative elements not in compliance with HOA Regulation 4.3b. Fine assessed, $500. Below that, a list of vague citations and a due date barely 2 weeks out. No warning. No photo. Just the fine. Inside the house, the smell of toast lingered in the kitchen. Ellen stood at the counter, sorting her book donation pile for the library. When Tom held up the letter, she tilted her head, reading it from across the room. Seriously, she said, setting a copy of The Bridges of Madison County aside. For the flower pots? He nodded and took another sip of coffee. Apparently the color doesn't match the approved palette. Ellen let out a long breath through her nose. You know, you always said the HOA left us alone because we kept things tidy. I guess tidy isn't enough anymore. Later that morning, after their usual breakfast at the Rusty Spoon Diner, Tom leaned back in the cracked vinyl booth and chuckled with Mr. Cho, who was telling a story about the time a former HOA board member tried to outlaw hanging laundry. Said it ruined the ambience, Mr. Cho scoffed. Ambience? In Texas summer? Tom dropped a couple of bills next to the check, leaving a few extra for Patty, their usual waitress. As they stepped out into the bright sunlight, he considered mentioning the fine, but decided against it. Not yet. Back home, Tom pulled the HOA handbook from the kitchen drawer. It was the same one they'd been issued when they moved in 15 years ago, plastic-bound and yellowing at the edges. Regulation 4.3b was, as he suspected, nothing more than a loosely written sentence about maintaining harmonious exterior aesthetics consistent with the community standard. There was no list of approved flower pot colors. No definition of harmonious. Just the kind of language that invited selective enforcement. Let's write them a polite email, Ellen suggested, drying her hands on a dish towel. Ask for clarification. Tom nodded slowly. Polite, he echoed, but his mind was already turning over the phrasing. Polite wouldn't mean much to a board that fined retirees for their planter choices. He decided to walk to the HOA kiosk that afternoon. It stood under a small wooden awning near the park entrance, where a corkboard displayed upcoming meetings, lost pet flyers, and the dreaded violation postings. Sure enough, a fresh list had gone up that morning. Names printed on white printer paper, neatly thumbtacked in 3 columns. Most were familiar, neighbors he waved to during morning walks, or nodded at during yard work on Saturdays. Next to each name, a fine. Unapproved mailbox, patio furniture visible from street, holiday lights after January 10th. He stood there longer than he meant to, tracing each name with his eyes. His own was there at the bottom of column 2. When he returned home, Maggie was on the porch swing, earbuds in, her sketchpad open across her lap. She glanced up. You okay? He smiled faintly and held up his notepad, now bearing more names than it had that morning. Just collecting some light reading. Mrs. Anders waved from her porch across the street. Tom waved back. He noticed her American flag drooped where the pole had slipped out of its bracket. At lunch, Ellen set out a plate of cold chicken salad and a small bowl of pickles. Tom unfolded his handwritten list next to his plate, reading the names again, slower this time. Maybe I'm not the only one tired of this. What started as one flower pot turned into a chorus of porch stories. The next morning, the air was already thick with heat, and the hum of porch fans drifted from house to house. Tom walked slowly along Maple Lane, clipboard in hand, his pen tucked behind his ear like a carpenter's pencil. The sidewalk shimmered faintly, and somewhere down the block, someone had already started a barbecue. The scent of hickory charcoal mingled with cut grass and warm tomato vines. He didn't start with the Farleys on purpose, it just happened that their dog barked as he passed, and Mr. Farley waved from behind the screen door, motioning him up. "Come in, Dawson. You look like you're about to melt." Inside, the Farleys' living room smelled of citrus polish and fabric softener. A box fan buzzed in the corner, and Mrs. Farley handed Tom a glass of lemonade before he'd finished explaining why he'd stopped by. "Solar lights," she said with a tight smile, "not even the blinking kind. Just little ones to help me get to the trash bin after dark." Mr. Farley leaned back in his recliner. "We got a fine. Said they disrupted the visual rhythm of the neighborhood. That rhythm never kept me from tripping over a raccoon last year." Tom wrote it down. No warning. No explanation. Nothing. Just the bill. He thanked them and moved on. At the next house, Mrs. Vargas stood in her doorway with her arms crossed but softened when he mentioned the flower pots. "Mailbox," she said, leading him down the walk. It was a curved, vintage cast-iron piece with painted numbers. "My father gave it to me when I bought this place. Said it looked like the one from his first home in El Paso. She'd been fined last spring, hadn't removed it, and received a second notice last month. I was waiting to see if they'd show up and rip it out themselves," she muttered. Tom didn't press. He just wrote it down and thanked her. She pressed 2 oatmeal cookies wrapped in wax paper into his hand as he left. The Singhs answered together. Their twin boys zipped past on bikes just as Mrs. Singh explained the violation, bicycles left visible from the street. Mr. Singh shook his head. "We keep them under the carport, for heaven's sake. Where are they supposed to go, the attic?" They weren't angry, just tired. "We thought we were the only ones," Mrs. Singh said. "Didn't want to cause waves." Tom folded his list quietly, feeling the weight of each line. Later that afternoon, he returned home and laid the clipboard on the dining table. Maggie looked up from her laptop, eyebrows raised. "How'd it go?" "Worse than I thought," he said, pulling the paper free. "But people are talking." She glanced over the notes, nodded, and flipped to a spreadsheet already open on her screen. "I've been setting it up. Columns by date, name, violation type, amount. We can sort it, run some patterns." Ellen emerged from the hallway holding a dusty manila envelope. "Original HOA bylaws," she said. "From when we bought the place. I thought it might be time to see if they say anything different from what Barbara's been quoting." Tom took the folder gently. "Good thinking." Mr. Cho arrived just after dinner, wearing a straw hat and carrying his tablet. "I heard you've been making the rounds," he said, settling onto the porch swing. "It's about time someone stirred the pot." He accepted a glass of iced tea from Ellen and leaned forward. "You know, if 2/3 of homeowners agree, you can force the board to hold a formal review. Even call for a re-election." Tom blinked. "That's real?" Cho nodded. Page 9. Most people never get past page 2. Inside, Maggie began mocking up a flyer. It was plain but clear. Bold header, "Have you been fined? Let's talk." Tom added a note at the bottom, "Informal backyard gathering, Sunday 3 p.m. Bring stories, not rage." That Sunday, the backyard chairs filled slowly. 10 people arrived, some with folding seats, others clutching papers or photo printouts. A few seemed nervous. Mrs. Vargas brought cookies again. Someone passed around bug spray. Tom didn't make a speech, he just asked questions and let people talk. One man mentioned getting fined for non-conforming porch trim. Another said he got a warning for using LED holiday lights. A woman whispered that she'd taken down her wind chimes after getting a second notice, afraid her name would appear on some public shame list. Tom nodded, took notes, and let them speak. As the sun lowered behind the cedar fence, Maggie spread out a neighborhood map on the picnic table. Colored dots marked each home that had received a fine. There were more than a dozen. She pointed toward the street corner. "We already have almost half the street." Barbara smiled like a politician, Tom spoke like a neighbor. The chairs creaked beneath shifting bodies as the clubhouse slowly filled. Ceiling vents blew air that barely cooled the room, and the faded American flag in the corner swayed limply. The fruit platter, set on a folding table near the front, was untouched, its pineapple chunks already sweating. Ellen nudged Maggie gently and offered her a wrapped hard candy, which she accepted without a word. Tom sat quietly in the third row, his notes folded neatly in his lap. Mr. Cho had arrived early and claimed a spot against the back wall, arms crossed over his pressed khaki shirt, eyes calm but observant. At exactly 6 p.m., Barbara stepped up to the podium. Her gold earrings caught the overhead light and swung gently with each calculated turn of her head. She began with a practiced smile. "Welcome, neighbors. So nice to see familiar faces and new ones as well. Let's keep things brief and productive." Tom felt Maggie shift beside him, her fingers drumming softly on the edge of her notebook. He waited. Barbara flipped a few papers, called for approval of the previous meeting's minutes, and listed minor landscaping updates. Then she paused, her eyes flicking toward Tom. "Before we close, I understand Mr. Dawson has a few questions." Tom stood slowly. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "I'd like to request clarification on several recent fines issued to residents. Many concern vague regulations, like unapproved aesthetics or non-conforming fixtures, with no reference to specific rules or standards." A few heads nodded. Mr. Farley, seated by the side wall, shifted forward in his seat. Barbara's smile tightened. "The HOA's responsibility is to maintain the neighborhood's appeal. That requires judgment. Standards evolve. But shouldn't those judgments be transparent?" Tom held up a printed notice. "This one was issued without warning, and the handbook doesn't even list the violation it references." From behind the podium, Barbara's tone grew cooler. "We have procedures in place, Mr. Dawson. This isn't about individual grievances, it's about the broader good." Tom didn't flinch. "I'm speaking on behalf of the broader good. Many residents have received fines with no clear cause, no photo evidence, and no explanation. I believe that warrants discussion." Doreen, seated beside Barbara, glanced around nervously, her smile faltering. One board member cleared his throat but said nothing. The rest stayed silent. That was when Mr. Cho stepped forward. "If I may," he said, walking toward the side of the room. Article 7 of the bylaws states that with signatures from 2/3 of homeowners, the board must hold a special hearing to review policy enforcement. That clause was added in 2003, in response to prior abuse of discretionary authority. Barbara turned to him, her earrings still. "That article refers to formal petitions." Mr. Cho didn't raise his voice. "Correct. And a petition has been circulating." A ripple moved through the crowd. Maggie opened her folder but didn't speak. Tom looked at Barbara. "We're not looking for a fight. We're looking for fairness." Barbara stepped back from the podium, lifted a paper, and cleared her throat. "I'm proposing a new amendment to the bylaws," she said. "Effective next cycle, any petition must be submitted in draft form to the board for review and pre-approval. That way, we can ensure only constructive input is advanced." Gasps scattered across the room. One woman whispered, "That's not right." Tom stood taller. "So you want to control what neighbors are allowed to question?" Barbara's earrings swayed again. "We want to maintain order." Tom's voice didn't rise, but it steadied. "Then you should know, we'll get 90% and won't need your approval." A stillness fell over the room. Even the fruit flies around the platter seemed to pause. Barbara leans forward, voice cold, "We'll see how far you really get." By the time Tom laid out the folding table, neighbors were lining up with pens. The green space between Willow Street and Elm was never much more than a shared lawn with a few benches, but under the shade of the old oaks, it felt like a gathering place. On this warm Saturday, the branches swayed slightly in the early July breeze, patriotic bunting fluttered along the fences, and the faint crackle of a backyard grill danced through the air, carrying the scent of corn and mesquite. Tom unfolded the sign-up sheet and clipped it down against the wind. Maggie taped the neighborhood map to the front of the table. Ellen unpacked a small box filled with plastic cups and napkins. A neighbor, they thought it was the woman from Lot 14, had quietly placed a jug of fresh lemonade beside the pen jar without a word. The Farleys were first to approach. Mr. Farley scanned the paper, looked at Tom, and gave a short nod before signing his name in steady, looping print. "Tired of the nonsense," he said plainly. His wife followed with a quick smile and a squeeze of Tom's arm. More came. Mrs. Vargas signed, then set down a tray of banana pudding on a picnic table nearby. "Snacks make revolutions sweeter," she joked. A group of teens zipped past on bikes, giggling and shouting, chased by a small dog. The laughter gave the moment a strange lightness. Maggie sat near the end of the table, color-coding the map as names came in, green dots for signatures, yellow for maybe, red for still afraid. She was surprisingly fast with her markers, updating the sheet every few minutes. "We're moving block by block," she murmured to herself. "This is happening." Helen Grafton arrived with the help of a walker and a straw hat pulled low over her silver curls. Tom stepped around the table to greet her. "I wasn't sure I'd come," she said softly. "But I've lived here since these houses were just frames and dreams. I remember when Barbara ran her first campaign, it was about front gardens and birdhouses. She even passed out tulip bulbs door to door." She signed slowly, deliberately, and smiled as she handed the pen back. She lost sight of that. Ellen passed her a cup of lemonade and helped her sit in a shaded chair. Still, not everyone was ready. A man from Walnut Lane muttered, "Don't want trouble," before walking off. A young couple near the swings hesitated, whispering to each other before one finally said, "We'll think about it." Carl, the HOA's enforcer, lingered near the sidewalk just long enough to be seen. He didn't approach the table. Just stood, arms crossed, sunglasses reflecting the trees, before disappearing around the corner. Tom kept his expression even. Ellen, standing beside him, discreetly turned her phone camera on and let it rest on the table's edge. Mr. Cho arrived not long after, holding a thick binder under one arm and a printed flyer in the other. "Here it is," he said. "The clause, under county ordinance, collective community action, especially when petition-based, can't be penalized by any civil HOA structure." He handed copies to Tom and Ellen, then passed a few down the line. As the sun lowered and shade crept across the lawn, the crowd thinned but the sheets filled. Maggie's tally passed 60%, then 70%. She stood, did the math again on her phone, and whispered to Tom. He nodded, lips pressed together. Then, with one more signature, Mrs. Singh, smiling shyly but firmly, they crossed it. 75%, Maggie said aloud. There was no cheer, no grand gesture. Just a shared glance between neighbors. Quiet resolve. Tom exhaled slowly and looked at the map. Dots everywhere. A few people clapped each other on the shoulder. A veteran near the tree pulled out a harmonica and began playing a slow, familiar tune. It was imperfect, but it hummed with something real. That evening, after the last chair had been folded and the last cookie wrapped up, Maggie sat on the couch with her laptop open and the window cracked to let in the scent of grill smoke and summer dusk. She called Tom over, pointing at the screen. A group post had gone up, signed by Barbara herself, "Outside agitators are disrupting the peace of Oak Ridge Pines." Barbara didn't confront Tom directly. She just hit send to all. The email landed just after lunch. Most neighbors were still sitting on porches with half-drunk lemonades or watering tomato beds when phones buzzed with the subject line, "Community Safety Notice, please read immediately." Within minutes, it became the talk of the block. The message was long, but its tone was clipped. Barbara cited recent actions by certain residents that she claimed were causing confusion, distress, and unnecessary division in our neighborhood. She didn't name Tom, but everyone knew. Further down, it accused unnamed individuals of misrepresenting HOA policy, and warned that some so-called petitions may jeopardize holiday privileges, increase outside vehicle presence, and compromise long-standing traditions. She signed it, Barbara Schaefer, HOA president. Ellen read it on her tablet, brows drawn. Maggie stood beside her, arms crossed. Tom was in the yard, replacing a cracked paving stone, when she came out to show him. He skimmed it once. Holiday privileges? She's trying to make it sound like you're going to cancel Christmas, Ellen said dryly. As if on cue, Will and Dorothy walked past, slower than usual, eyes lingering just a little too long on Tom. They'd signed the petition 2 days ago, Will with a firm handshake, Dorothy with a wink. But now, Dorothy just gave a soft, uncertain smile. Will tipped his cap half-heartedly. A few minutes later, Maggie pulled up next door on her phone. It's spreading. She showed them a screenshot. A local teenager had reposted the email with the caption, HOA drama. Are we losing porch lights and BBQs? Tom sighed. This is how it starts. Doubt. Maggie looked at him. Then we don't leave doubt. We document. She disappeared into her room and returned with her laptop. Over the next hour, she pieced together a video timeline. Split screen, on one side, screenshots of Barbara's claims, on the other, direct clips from the HOA handbook and footage from the neighborhood meetup. She added soft music, a narrator's voice, Ellen's, calm and clear, and an opening title, Fact Check, Oak Ridge Pines Petition. They uploaded it to the same neighborhood forum Barbara had used. It didn't go viral, but within the first hour, it had a dozen comments, many from people who had hesitated to sign. Tom stood at the kitchen window, watching the sprinkler twitch in slow arcs over the grass. We should have seen this coming. Mr. Cho arrived not long after. He set his hat on the hallway bench and pulled out a neatly clipped packet of papers. I read her email, he said, unwrapping a peppermint. And I reviewed what you posted in response. Anything illegal on our end? Tom asked. Cho smiled faintly. No. But she's brushing close to defamation herself. Implying false motives in a public message to residents? That's slippery ground. Ellen handed him a fresh printout of Barbara's original message. He nodded approvingly. Save everything. That night, they kept things quiet. Ellen made grilled cheese sandwiches, and Tom sat beside Maggie as she responded to respectful questions in the forum. A few neighbors thanked them. One offered to bring over extra chairs for future gatherings. Another reposted Helen's tulip story. Then, just before 9, Ellen returned from the mailbox with a single manila envelope. She handed it to Tom. He opened it slowly, reading the return address aloud. Tom, this one's from a law firm. The HOA might have sent a threat, but Tom had sent a petition, and it carried more weight. The storm rolled in not long after dinner. Fat drops thudded against the living room window as Tom sat at the table, the manila envelope opened beside him. Legal pads were stacked between coffee mugs and a scattering of highlighters. The printer hummed steadily in the background, spitting out the third copy of a petition summary. A low classical piece, something by Copeland, played from Ellen's small speaker in the corner. Tom held the letter up and read aloud. Cease and desist all unauthorized communication and gatherings under HOA grounds. He paused. Violation of Decorum Bylaws 3.1, 4.6, and 6.2. Further action may include legal recourse. Maggie, curled on the couch with her laptop, scoffed. They really want to sound scary. Mr. Cho tapped his fountain pen 3 times against his yellow legal pad before speaking. There's nothing actionable in that letter. It's full of buzzwords and fluff. No specific citations. No procedural legitimacy. Ellen joined them, holding 2 folders. Clause 12, she said, flipping through one. Residents have the right to organize, circulate petitions, and request hearings without prior board approval. I highlighted it. Tom nodded slowly. They're banking on fear. Mr. Cho leaned forward. Then we give them facts. Document everything. And push. The next few hours moved like clockwork. Maggie built a clean, simple website called Oak Ridge HOA Watch. She uploaded every HOA document they could legally share: bylaws, screenshots, email copies, past newsletters. Ellen sorted physical printouts, sliding duplicates into color-coded binders. A neighbor dropped off 2 old issues of Oak Ridge Monthly, dated from 2007, with highlighted sections where Barbara had once praised free speech and neighborhood-led improvement. Tom typed slowly but with purpose. The document he titled Formal Petition Demand for Emergency Hearing was brief, citing the precise bylaw language, the number of verified signatures, 87%, he noted, and listing the articles their petition sought to review. He printed 5 copies, initialed them all. Carl showed up just after 10. Rain ran off the shoulders of his windbreaker as he stepped onto the porch, handed Tom a sealed envelope, and gave a short nod. Tom didn't invite him in. He didn't need to. As midnight approached, Ellen moved through the room silently, refilling mugs, occasionally placing a gentle hand on Tom's shoulder. At one point, she wore her old librarian badge, pinned as a joke, maybe, but something about it gave the moment weight. By 2 a.m., Maggie finished uploading the last PDF. "It's live," she said, leaning back and stretching. Tom signed the final copy of the formal demand. Mr. Cho tapped his pen once, twice, 3 times. "It's done." At sunrise, the storm had passed. The streets glistened with leftover rain, and the grass beneath the community board squelched slightly underfoot. Tom arrived just after 6, wearing his oldest jacket, the one with the frayed cuffs. He pinned the petition to the board slowly, with deliberate care, each corner anchored, perfectly level. Behind him, a small group of neighbors gathered silently, still in house slippers and robes, coffee in hand. No words. Just presence. From across the street came the hum of a car engine. A black SUV slowed as it approached the board, paused. Behind the wheel, Barbara's face was still. No wave. No smile. Then she sped up and disappeared around the corner. By 6 p.m., every chair was filled, and some folks brought their own. The folding chairs creaked and shuffled as neighbors settled in, their murmurs low and expectant. A few stood along the walls, fanning themselves with printed copies of the petition. The overhead ceiling fans whirred softly, doing little more than push the warm air in circles. Orange light filtered through the west-facing windows, staining the wood-paneled walls of the Oak Ridge Pines clubhouse in long, burning stripes. Someone had set a pitcher of lemonade near the door. A bowl of peppermint candies sat untouched on the table beside the sign-in sheet. Tom sat near the front, flanked by Ellen and Maggie. His notes were folded once, neatly, resting on his lap. Barbara stood behind the lectern, tapping her papers into alignment. Doreen sat beside her, shoulders tense, eyes darting. 2 board members sat stone-faced to her left, the third, a younger man with round glasses, fidgeted with a pen. Barbara cleared her throat. "Good evening. This meeting has been called under unusual circumstances, and while we acknowledge the concerns raised," her eyes flicked briefly toward Tom, "we must also caution against emotionally driven campaigns that may fracture the harmony of our neighborhood." A few heads turned. No one clapped. Tom stood slowly. This petition wasn't built on emotion. It was built on documentation, signatures, and the bylaws we all received when we bought our homes. Clause 12 allows for community-initiated hearings. Clause 7.4 allows for board review with sufficient support. He turned, letting his voice carry. 87% of households agreed to this. Not because they're angry, but because they're tired. Of confusion. Of inconsistency. Of fear over flower pots and porch flags. Barbara's smile strained. And yet, this campaign has included misinformation, claims about fines being arbitrary. They were, said a voice from the corner. Heads turned. Helen Grafton stood slowly, using her cane for support. A resident helped her to the aisle, where she faced the room. She held a printed copy of the 1994 HOA newsletter, yellowed and folded. "I was here when the HOA was started. When the biggest debate was whether to paint the benches blue or white. We did this to keep the street clean, to help neighbors find lost dogs and babysitters. Not to hand out fines like parking tickets. She looked directly at Barbara. You've forgotten who we are. Silence followed. Then Mr. Cho stepped forward, holding a pair of bylaw folders. The updates from 1996 and 2003 confirm that with over two-thirds support, the board is required to review any formal motion brought by residents. He set the documents down with quiet finality. The man in glasses on the board raised a hand halfway. Maybe we should vote on scheduling an election. I mean, it's clearly supported. Barbara snapped her gaze toward him. This is a coordinated attempt to disrupt order. Mr. Dawson's daughter has circulated edited videos. They've manipulated sentiment. This isn't democratic, it's staged. Maggie shifted but stayed silent. Tom remained steady. We're not tearing anything down, he said. We're putting the neighborhood back up. It wasn't a roar. Just hands slowly coming together. A few claps at first, then more. Not raucous, but steady. A kind of agreement without shouting. Barbara reached for her purse, her motions sharp. She stood, turned to no one in particular, and said only, "You'll regret this." The same porch where a fine once hung now held 2 planters, and a thank you card. They were simple planters. One terracotta, one deep blue, neither regulation, but both full of bright marigolds that caught the morning sun. The card sat between them, wedged under the base of the flagpole. Tom didn't recognize the handwriting on the envelope, but the message inside was short: "You made me feel like I belonged again. Thank you." Labor Day weekend had arrived with a soft breeze and the faint scent of cinnamon from someone's kitchen. Small flags dotted the porches. Folding tables appeared in front yards with covered dishes and handwritten labels. One tent near the green space held an entire row of pumpkin pies, each slightly different, crimped crusts, sugared tops, one with a whipped cream smiley face. Tom walked the sidewalk slowly, hands in his pockets. People waved more freely now. Some crossed over to shake hands. A few thanked him directly. Most just smiled, their eyes crinkling the way relief sometimes looks. In the weeks since the hearing, the neighborhood had begun to shift. The HOA held its election at the end of July. Barbara didn't campaign. She didn't protest. She simply stepped down. Helen Grafton, Mr. Cho, and 2 longtime residents were voted in, quietly, unanimously. The new board's first act was to hold an open forum. The second was to rewrite the most vague bylaws into plain English. Warnings now came with photos. Grace periods were standard. Carl, who once delivered envelopes with a clipboard and an unreadable expression, now sat under a maple tree near the park, playing checkers with a teenager who laughed every time he made a bad move. Ellen spent most of her free time organizing the little free library near the bus stop, sometimes sneaking in band classics when no one was looking. She'd donated a bench, too, now resting under the tall oak near the sidewalk, with a bronze plaque that read, "For neighbors who listen." Maggie completed her school project, the Oak Ridge Report, a documentary-style slideshow filled with interviews, footage from meetings, and moments caught in stillness, Helen's speech, Carl's game, the flyer that started it all. She presented it to her class the week school resumed and dedicated it to her parents. That morning, Tom sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, his old mug warming his hands. Cicadas buzzed in the distance. The porch swing creaked faintly. Ellen joined him with a fresh glass of iced tea, condensation dripping down the sides. They didn't speak for a while. Eventually, Barbara passed on the sidewalk, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a soft blue blouse. She didn't look angry. Didn't look away. Just nodded once, gently, and kept walking. Tom watched her go, then glanced down at the thank you card again. The handwriting was careful, like someone who'd practiced it before committing pen to paper. He turned to Ellen and said, "It started with a fine. But maybe it ended with something finer." The porch that once held a warning now welcomed laughter, lemonade, and marigolds in full bloom. What began as one man's quiet question turned into a shared stand, a community reclaiming its voice without anger, just purpose. When rules are used to serve people, neighborhoods grow strong, but when they're used to control, even the gentlest pushback can bring light. Perhaps it's never too late to knock on a neighbor's door, to ask, "Are you okay with this?" and realize that change often starts with a simple sign-up sheet. Like a porch light left on in a storm, one honest stand can guide a whole street home.